Hi everyone. Welcome to the class of Literary Theory. We are going through fifth module Post-colonialism, Postmodernism and Eco-criticism. Today's class I will be dealing with some theories and their key terms. Let's begin with the term subaltern. Subaltern meaning of inferior rank or a junior ranking officer in the British Army is a term adopted by the Italian Marxist theorist Antonio Gramsci to refer to those groups in society who are subject to the hegemony or dominance of the ruling classes. He used it in the prison notebooks to refer to socially subordinated groups that by definition lacked the unity and organization of those in power. Subaltern classes may include peasants, workers, and other groups denied access to hegemonic power. Since the history of the ruling classes is realized in the state, history being the history of states and dominant groups, Gramsci was interested in the historiography of the subaltern classes. In Notes on Italian History, he outlined a 6-point plan for studying the history of the subaltern classes, which included their objective formation, their active or passive affiliation to the dominant political formations, the birth of new parties and dominant groups, the formations that the subaltern groups produce to press their claims, new formations within the old framework that assert the autonomy of the subaltern classes, and other points referring to trade unions and political parties. These are the 6-point plan for studying the history of subaltern classes. Gramsci claimed that the history of the subaltern classes was just as complex as the history of the dominant classes, although the history of the latter is usually that which is accepted as official history. For him, the history of subaltern social groups is necessarily fragmented and episodic, since they are always subject to the activity of ruling groups, even when they rebel. Clearly, they have less access to the means by which they may control their own representation and less access to cultural and social institutions. Only permanent victory can break that pattern of subordination, and even that does not occur immediately. The term has been adopted to post-colonial studies from the work of the Subaltern Studies group of historians who aimed to promote a systematic discussion of subaltern themes in South Asian studies. It is used in subaltern studies as a name for the general attribute of subordination in South Asian society, whether this is expressed in terms of class, caste, age, gender, and office, or in any other way. The group formed by Ranajit Guha, and initially including Shahid Amin, David Arnold, Partha Chatterjee, David Hardiman, and Gyan Pandey, has produced 5 volumes of subaltern studies, essays relating to the history, politics, economics, and sociology of subalternity, as well as the attitudes, ideologies, and belief systems. In short, the culture informing that condition. The purpose of the subaltern studies project was to redress the imbalance created in academic work by a tendency to focus on elites and elite culture in South Asian historiography. Elites means a select group that is superior in terms of ability or quality. Recognizing that subordination cannot be understood except in a binary relationship with dominance, the group aimed to examine the subaltern as an objective assessment of the role of the elite and as a critique of elitist interpretations of that role. The goals of the group stemmed from the belief that the historiography of Indian nationalism, for instance, had long been dominated by elitism, colonialist elitism, and bourgeois nationalist elitism, both the consequences of British colonialism. Such historiography suggested that the development of a nationalist consciousness was an exclusively elite achievement, either of colonial administrators, policy, or culture, or of elite Indian personalities, institutions, or ideas. Consequently, asserts Guha, such writing cannot acknowledge or interpret the contribution made by people on their own, that is, independently of the elite. What is clearly left out by the class subaltern outlook of such historiography is a politics of the people, which he claims is an autonomous domain that continued to operate when the elite politics became outmoded. One clear demonstration of the difference between the elite and the subaltern lies in the nature of political mobilization. Elite mobilization was achieved vertically through adaptation of British parliamentary institutions, while the subaltern relied on the traditional organization of kinship and territoriality or class associations. Popular mobilization in the colonial period took the form of peasant uprisings, and the contention is that this remains a primary locus of political action despite the change in political structure. This is very different from the claims of elite historiography that Indian nationalism was primarily an idealist venture in which the indigenous elite led the people from subjugation to freedom. Despite the great diversity of subaltern groups, the one invariant feature was a notion of resistance to elite domination. The failure of the bourgeois to speak for the nation meant that the nation of India failed to come into its own. And for Guha, it is the study of this failure which constitutes the central problematic of Indian historiography. Clearly, the concept of the subaltern is meant to cut across several kinds of political and cultural binaries, such as colonialism versus nationalism, or imperialism versus indigenous cultural expression, in favor of a more general distinction between subaltern and elite, because, suggests Guha, this subaltern group is invariably overlooked in studies of political and cultural change. The notion or idea of the subaltern became an issue in post-colonial theory when Gayatri Spivak critiqued the assumptions of the subaltern studies group in the essay Can the Subaltern Speak? This question, she claims, is one that the group must ask. Her first criticism is directed at the Gramscian claim for the autonomy of the subaltern group, which she says no amount of qualification by Guha, who concedes the diversity, heterogeneity, and overlapping or covering nature of subaltern groups, can save from its fundamentally essentialist premise. Second, no methodology for determining who or what might constitute this group can avoid this essentialism. The people or the subaltern is a group defined by its difference from the elite. To guard against essentialist views of subalternity, Guha suggests that there is a further distinction to be made between the subaltern and dominant indigenous groups at the regional and local levels. However, Guha's attempt to guard against essentialism by specifying the range of subaltern groups serves only, according to Spivak, to problematize the idea of the subaltern itself still further. The task of research is to investigate, identify, and measure the specific nature of the degree of deviation of the dominant indigenous groups at the regional and local level from the ideal or the subaltern and situate it historically. But asks Spivak, what taxonomy can fix such a space? For the true subaltern group, she says, whose identity is its difference, there is no unrepresentable subaltern subject that can know and speak itself. One cannot construct a category of the subaltern that has an effective voice clearly and unproblematically identifiable as such, a voice that does not at the same time occupy many other possible speaking positions. Spivak goes on to elaborate the problems of the category of the subaltern by looking at the situation of gendered subjects and of Indian women in particular for both as an object of colonialist historiography and as a subject of insurgency. The ideological construction of gender keeps the male dominant. For if in the context of colonial protection, the subaltern has no history and cannot speak, the subaltern as female is even more deeply in shadow. Spivak examines the position of Indian women through an analysis of a particular case and concludes with the declaration that the subaltern cannot speak. This has sometimes been interpreted to mean that there is no way in which oppressed or politically marginalized groups can voice their resistance, or that the subaltern only has a dominant language or a dominant voice in which to be heard. But Spivak's target is the concept of an unproblematically constituted subaltern identity rather than the subaltern subject's ability to give voice to political concerns. Her point is that no act of dissent or resistance occurs on behalf of an essential subaltern subject entirely separate from the dominant discourse that provides the language and the conceptual categories with which the subaltern voice speaks. Clearly, the existence of post-colonial discourse itself is an example of such speaking, and in most cases, the dominant language or mode of representation is appropriated so that the marginal voice can be heard. I hope all of you have got an idea about what is subaltern. You don't forget the role of Antonio Gramsci and Gayatri Spivak in subaltern. Next, I wish to introduce the term uncanny. Uncanny means mysterious or unusual. What is the definition of uncanny? It is aesthetics and psychoanalysis merged here. The uncanny is the subject of aesthetics because it has to do with a certain kind of feeling or sensation with emotional impulses. But in general, aesthetics has neglected to study the uncanny, preferring to concentrate on beauty and generally on more positive emotions, the attractive, the sublime, etc. The uncanny is something fearful and frightening. We can say that it is mysterious. It has been neglected in the history of aesthetics. So, uncanny as the class of frightening things that leads us back to what is known and familiar. When we study the German words heimlich and unheimlich, it means canny or homey, uncanny or unhomey. Heimlich means belonging to the house, friendly, familiar. It has also the meaning intimate, comfortable, that is secure, domestic, hospitable. When we go through the word heimlich, we can see the meanings concealed, secret, withheld from sight and from others, secretive, deceitful, etc. So the term heimlich embodies the dialectic of privacy and intimacy that is inherent in bourgeois ideology. So Freud can associate it with the private parts, the parts of the body that are most intimate and that are simultaneously those parts subject to the most concealment. Homi K. Bhabha, a leading voice in post-colonial studies, has propounded several key concepts in the study of multicultural literature. He has contributed a set of challenging concepts such as hybridity, mimicry, ambivalence, stereotypes, uncanny, nation, otherness, etc. to post-colonial theory. So all these concepts reflect in the colonial subject resistance to exhibit the unsecured power of the colonizer. Bhabha has traced the history of colonialism and cultures that intrude on the present, demanding to transform our understanding of cross-cultural relations. He has influenced by Western post-structuralist theorists, notably such as Jacques Derrida, Lacan, and Michel Foucault. According to Toni Morrison, Bhabha is one of those small groups occupying the front rank of literary and cultural thought. We can see that he has also used the term uncanny. I think this is enough for today's class. Thank you.